Stephen Wright stared at his phone screen, the cruel blue light illuminating his cramped studio apartment as rain hammered against the single window. The text message from his ex-wife, Miranda, sat there like a venomous snake coiled in his palm. "You'll die broke, Stephen, just like your pathetic father. At least I got out before you dragged me down with you." His hands trembled as he set the phone face down on the scratched coffee table he'd rescued from a sidewalk 3 years ago. The apartment told the story better than words ever could. 400 square feet of faded dreams in a building that smelled perpetually of cabbage and disappointment. His bed was a futon that had seen better decades, covered with a blanket his mother had crocheted before the cancer took her 5 years ago. Stephen was 42 years old, and he looked every day of it. His hair had started going gray at 35. The lines around his eyes had deepened from years of squinting at computer screens in dimly lit offices, working jobs that barely covered rent. His clothes came from thrift stores, carefully selected to look professional enough for work but cheap enough that losing them wouldn't hurt. The rain intensified, and somewhere in the building, Mrs. Chen's television blared the evening news through paper-thin walls. Stephen walked to his window, looking out at the city lights blurred by rain and grime. Out there, Miranda was probably in her new townhouse with her new husband, Trevor, the pharmaceutical sales representative with the white teeth and the luxury sedan. His phone buzzed again. An unknown number. The message was brief and strange. "Mr. Wright, this is Special Agent Rebecca Torres with the FBI. It's urgent that you call me immediately regarding your family estate. Time sensitive. Do not discuss this with anyone." A phone number followed. Stephen read it 3 times, his heart rate climbing with each pass. FBI? Family estate? His father had died 8 months ago in a VA hospital, alone except for Stephen, who'd held his hand through those final rattling breaths. Michael Wright had been a mechanic, a veteran, and a man who'd worked 70-hour weeks his entire life and still died with nothing but medical debt and a rusted pickup truck. There was no estate. There was nothing. This had to be a scam. But the message had said FBI. Would scammers impersonate federal agents? What did he have to lose? Stephen dialed the number with shaking fingers. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, crisp and professional. "Special Agent Torres. This is Stephen Wright. I got a text message. Mr. Wright, thank you for calling back. I need to verify some information first. What was your father's full name and date of birth?" Stephen's mouth went dry. "Michael James Wright. Born April 15, 1953. He died in February." "What is this about?" There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Mr. Wright, I'm calling from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Are you currently alone and in a private location?" "Yes, I'm in my apartment. You're scaring me." "Your father isn't in any trouble, Mr. Wright. Quite the opposite." Another pause. "Mr. Wright, are you sitting down?" "Yes. Approximately 6 hours ago, we concluded a 4-year investigation into an international fraud and identity theft ring. During our investigation, we recovered substantial assets that were stolen from their rightful owners over nearly 3 decades. Agent Torres's voice softened. "One of those owners was your grandfather, James Robert Wright. Stephen's grandfather. He died when Stephen was 7. He barely remembered the man except for rough hands and the smell of pipe tobacco." "I don't understand." "Your grandfather was a successful patent attorney in the 1960s and 70s. He held patents on several industrial processes that generated substantial royalties. In 1989, a man named Marcus Devereaux, who worked as your grandfather's financial advisor, systematically stole your grandfather's identity and transferred his entire estate into shell companies. Your grandfather died in 1990, apparently believing he'd lost everything in bad investments." The room seemed to tilt. Stephen gripped the edge of his futon. "My father. Did he know?" "We don't believe so. The stolen assets were hidden across 14 countries. Took our team years to unravel it. We've recovered approximately 83% of the original estate." "How much?" Stephen whispered. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Agent Torres took a breath. Mr. Wright, the recovered assets total approximately $156 million. You are your father's sole heir, and he was your grandfather's sole heir. After legal fees and restitution, you're looking at a net inheritance of approximately $142 million. The words didn't make sense. Stephen opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's not possible. I assure you it's very real. However, we need to proceed carefully. I'm going to need you to come to our field office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Bring identification, and Mr. Wright, please don't tell anyone about this conversation. We need to ensure your safety during this transition. Stephen looked around his apartment at his thrift store furniture, his single pot and pan, the corner where water damage had stained the ceiling brown. He thought about Miranda's text message. You'll die broke. Mr. Wright, are you still there? Yes, I'll be there. 9 a.m. After she hung up, Stephen sat in silence. The rain had stopped, and the city sounds filtered through his window. Tomorrow his life would either transform or collapse completely. But tonight, he was still Stephen Wright, 42 years old, sitting in a 400-square-foot apartment, wondering how a man survives a miracle. Sleep was impossible. Stephen lay on his futon staring at the water-stained ceiling, his mind racing. $142 million. The number was so large it had no meaning. He tried to contextualize it. That was his annual salary of $32,000 multiplied by... His tired brain couldn't do the math. At 3 a.m., he gave up and made instant coffee. He sat at his wobbling table and did what he always did when overwhelmed. He made a list. Stephen was a list maker, a habit inherited from his father who had kept meticulous notebooks for every car repair, every expense. The list started practical: call work, cancel shift, bring ID, wear best clothes. But then his pen hesitated and he started writing other things. Call Dad's friend Jerry, pay off medical debt, buy real coffee. The list began to blur as tears burned his eyes. Stephen Wright had not cried at his father's funeral. He'd been too numb, too focused on the logistics of death. The cremation he could barely afford, the memorial service, the endless paperwork. He'd handled it all with grim efficiency. But now, alone at 3 a.m., he wept. For his father who'd worked himself to death for nothing. For his grandfather who'd died believing he'd failed. For himself, for all the years of scrambling and making do. For every meal skipped, every medical appointment postponed, every time he'd done the math in the grocery store and put items back because he was 17 cents short. When the sun rose, Stephen showered and dressed in his interview clothes. Khaki pants that were slightly too big, a button-down shirt he'd ironed on his bed using a towel as padding, and the one tie he owned. The jacket was a thrift store find that almost fit. At 7 a.m., he took 2 buses downtown, spending $3.50 on fare. The FBI field office was in a modern glass building. Stephen stood outside for 5 minutes, watching people in expensive suits flow in and out. His reflection showed him what he was. A middle-aged man in clothes that didn't quite fit, carrying a backpack instead of a briefcase, standing on the threshold of a world that had always existed behind glass. You'll die broke, Stephen. He pushed through the door. Agent Rebecca Torres was nothing like he'd imagined. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Mr. Wright, thank you for coming. Over the next 3 hours, Stephen met lawyers, financial advisors, security consultants. They gave him forms to sign, numbers to memorize, advice to remember. But the moment that felt most real came at 2:37 p.m. when Agent Torres showed him his account balance on a tablet. $142,478,923.17. The 17 cents is interest from this morning, she said with a slight smile. Welcome to wealth, Mr. Wright. What do I do? He whispered. Today, go home and process this. Tomorrow, start building the life your grandfather wanted for his family. But Stephen, she waited until he met her eyes. Remember who you are. Don't let this money turn you into Marcus Devereaux. Let it turn you into the man your father raised. When Stephen left the building, the world looked the same but felt different. He took out his phone and opened a new message to Jerry Hoffman, his father's old friend. "Jerry, it's Steven. Can we meet for coffee? I have something to tell you about Dad. My treat." The response came quickly. "You bet, kid. Usual place tomorrow at 8. Steven smiled. He had so much to tell him. The coffee shop was Rosie's, where Steven had met his father every Sunday. Jerry Hoffman was already there when Steven arrived, his weathered face breaking into a smile beneath his Vietnam veteran cap. Over coffee and eggs, Steven told Jerry everything. The FBI agent, the stolen inheritance, the impossible number in his account. Jerry listened without interrupting. When Steven finished, the old man leaned back. "Michael's father. I'll be damned." His eyes were wet. "Your dad thought his father had gambled everything away. Mike carried that guilt his whole life. And all along, the old man had been robbed blind. Your father should have known this. He deserved to know." "That's what kills me," Steven said. "He died thinking he'd failed. And now I have more money than I can spend." Jerry gripped Steven's wrist. "Your father didn't work for money. He worked because he was a good man. He worked to raise you, to teach you. That wasn't for nothing. That was everything." Over the next few days, Steven began untangling his old life. He quit his temp agency job, called his landlord to give notice, and started apartment hunting. The financial advisor counseled moderation, so he settled on a modest 2-bedroom condo, modest by millionaire standards. But then word started leaking out. Cousins he'd never met called. High school acquaintances appeared. A woman claiming to be his second cousin emailed about her daughter's medical bills. Miranda called. Steven stared at her name before answering. "Steven, I heard the news. Is it true?" Her voice was honey-sweet, so different from her last text. "I've been thinking about us, about what we had. I made a mistake leaving you." Steven looked around his new condo. "Miranda, the good times you're remembering? Those were when I had nothing. You texted me 3 weeks ago telling me I'd die broke like my father. Remember? I was angry. People say things. You meant it, and you were probably right except for this. But this money doesn't change who I am. I'm still the same person you left." He paused. "Goodbye, Miranda." He hung up and blocked her number. The real blow came from his half-brother, Marcus. They shared a father but different mothers and had never been close. Marcus showed up unannounced. "Nice place," Marcus said, walking in without invitation. "Quite an upgrade." "What do you want, Marcus?" "What's fair, Steven? Dad was my father too. That money should be split between us. The inheritance came through Grandfather Wright. Your mother was married to Dad for 10 years. I'm his son just as much as you are." Marcus's face reddened. "Morally? Ethically? That money should be shared." Steven felt something hard form in his chest. "Dad left everything to me. You know why? Because you never visited him in the hospital. Not once. I was there every day, Marcus. Every single day watching him die. So this is revenge? This is inheritance law. This is what Dad wanted." Steven opened the door. "You need to leave." Marcus pulled out his phone. "You'll regret this. My lawyer will be in touch." After he left, Steven sat on his new couch and put his head in his hands. This was what wealth meant. Not freedom, just different problems. Jerry texted, "Come to the VFW tomorrow night. Dad's old crew wants to see you." Steven smiled for the first time in days. "I'll be there." The VFW hall hadn't changed in 20 years. Steven walked in to find a dozen men waiting, all his father's age or older, all standing when he entered. Jerry stepped forward. "Boys, this is Mike's son, Steven." They shook his hand one by one. Bill Kaplan spoke. "We heard what happened. About your grandfather, the money. We wanted you to know your father was rich in ways that mattered. He had respect, friends, a son who loved him. That's wealth. The money, that's just numbers." "But," Tommy Rodriguez added, "numbers can do good things. We wanted to run an idea by you." They laid out their vision. A veterans center. Housing, job training, mental health services. They'd been dreaming about it for years but never had the resources. How much would this cost? Stephen asked. Maybe $5 million to start, Tommy said. $5 million. Stephen could write that check and still have more money than he could spend. Let me think about it, he said. But I like the idea. A lot. The rest of the evening was spent sharing stories about his father. Stephen heard things he'd never known. How his dad had driven 8 hours through a snowstorm to bail out a friend. How he'd quietly paid for Tommy's daughter's school supplies for 3 years. How he'd been the guy everyone called for help. Your old man was a saint, Bill said. Too good for this world. Stephen drove home with strange clarity. The money wasn't his, not really. It was his grandfather's legacy, his father's inheritance, a gift that came with responsibility. The next morning, he called his financial advisor. I want to set up a foundation, the Michael Wright Veterans Initiative. $5 million initially. Can you help? Stephen, most of my clients give to charity strategically for tax purposes. What you're describing is real philanthropy. I don't care about strategy. I care about helping people my dad would have helped. Then yes, let's make it happen. The foundation became real with paperwork and meetings. Stephen met Maria Gonzalez, a social worker who specialized in veteran services. Most rich people write checks and feel good without asking if it makes a difference, she told him bluntly. Is that you? No. I want to be involved. I want this to matter. Over the next month, Stephen became a student of veteran services. He visited shelters, met veterans with heartbreaking stories. A woman named Sheila who'd served in Iraq and lost custody of her kids. A man named Ray living in his car, too proud to ask for help. Stephen wrote checks. Ray's apartment deposit. Sheila's lawyer fees. A van for the Veterans Outreach Program. Each check was a small miracle, but it felt random. He was one person trying to fix a system broken in 1,000 ways. The building came up for sale in June. A former school, perfect for conversion. Stephen bought it cash and hired contractors. Apartments on upper floors, community spaces below. A kitchen, clinic, counseling offices. Jerry came during construction. Mike would have loved this. This doesn't fix the system, Stephen replied. But maybe it fixes things for a few people. Then Marcus sued him. The lawsuit claimed Marcus was entitled to half the inheritance as Michael Wright's son. Stephen's lawyer said it was garbage, but it would cost hundreds of thousands to fight. What are my options? Fight and win eventually, or make him an offer to go away. Stephen thought about his father's values. Set up a meeting, face to face. They met in a conference room. Marcus arrived with his lawyer, ready for battle. Marcus, why are you doing this? Stephen asked directly. His brother blinked, caught off guard. What? Why are you suing me? Is it about money or something else? Marcus's jaw tightened. You got everything. Dad's attention, his time, his love. And now this, while I got nothing. You got a mother who loved you, a stepfather who raised you, opportunities one never had. You went to college. You have a career. Dad loved you, but you never made time for him. That was your choice. He chose you, Marcus said, suddenly looking less like a businessman and more like a hurt child. Stephen felt understanding. I'll make you an offer, not because you deserve it legally, but because you're my brother and Dad would want me to do the right thing. $500,000. One time and you dropped the lawsuit. Why $500,000? Because it's life-changing but not enough to stop you from working. Because maybe Dad shortchanged you in some ways, and I can't fix the past, but I can try to balance the scales. Marcus stared at the table, a war happening behind his eyes. Finally, he looked up. 600,000. Done. We signed today, and this is over. They signed the papers. Marcus left but paused at the door. For what it's worth, the Veterans Building. That's a good thing. After he left, Stephen's lawyer shook her head. You didn't have to give him anything. I know, but now I can move forward. That's worth 600,000. The Michael Wright Veterans Center opened in September, 8 months after Stephen's life had changed. They held a small ceremony with ribbon cutting. The local news covered it, the first media attention Stephen had received, and it made him uncomfortable seeing himself on screen. talking about his father and the mission. 30 veterans moved in that first month. Stephen met each one, shook their hands, heard their stories. Antonio, who'd served in Afghanistan and came home with PTSD so severe he couldn't hold a job. Carmen, a Navy veteran sleeping in her car with 2 kids. David, who'd lost his leg in Iraq and been fighting the VA for benefits while living in shelters. Maria ran the center with an iron hand and soft heart, coordinating services, connecting veterans with resources. She pulled Stephen aside 3 months after opening. You know what's different about this place? It's not just the building or services. It's that you show up. You're here twice a week, talking to people, learning names, caring about outcomes. Most donors never see the impact. You're living it. These are my father's people, Stephen said simply. How could I not? Recognition came in unexpected ways. A veteran named Frank pulled Stephen aside and told him the job placement program had helped him land a city position. First real job in 4 years. I start Monday. My kids. I'm going to be able to see them again once I have stable housing and employment. A woman named Patricia, who'd been homeless for 2 years after serving in the Air Force, got her own apartment through the program. She showed Stephen her key with tears streaming down her face. I have a home, an actual home. These moments became Stephen's new wealth. Not the numbers in his account, but the lives changing. The dignity being restored. The futures being rebuilt. Jerry visited regularly, often bringing other veterans from the VFW. They'd sit in the community room drinking coffee, telling stories. Stephen realized his father was more present here than he'd been at the funeral. Every veteran who got help, every life that changed direction, that was Michael Wright's legacy. But the center was just the beginning. Stephen established a scholarship fund for veterans' children. Full ride to community college or trade school. He funded a mobile medical clinic that served homeless veterans. He partnered with local employers to create job opportunities specifically for veterans transitioning to civilian life. The money kept growing despite his spending. His financial advisor showed him quarterly reports with numbers that made his head spin. You're doing everything right, Patricia Chin told him. Living modestly, giving generously, investing wisely. At this rate, you'll have more money when you die than you started with. Then I need to give away more, Stephen said. He expanded the Veterans Center, adding a second building. He funded similar programs in 3 other cities. He established an endowment to ensure the work would continue long after he was gone. One afternoon, Maria brought a young veteran named Jason to meet Stephen. Jason was 24, recently discharged from the Marines, struggling with nightmares and survivor's guilt after losing 3 friends in combat. Jason wants to go to college, Maria said. Study social work. Help other veterans. But he's worried about money. Stephen looked at Jason, really looked at him. He saw his father at that age, coming home from Vietnam to a country that didn't want to acknowledge what he'd been through. He saw himself, struggling to make ends meet, always one crisis away from losing everything. What school? Stephen asked. State University has a good program, Jason said quietly. But with housing and everything, it's maybe $80,000 for 4 years. I was going to try to work full-time and go part-time, but Maria said, full scholarship, Stephen interrupted. Tuition, housing, books, living expenses. You focus on school, get your degree, come back and work at the center when you graduate. Deal? Jason's eyes widened. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Yes. God, yes. Thank you. After Jason left, nearly floating, Maria sat down with Stephen. You just changed that kid's entire life trajectory. My grandfather was a genius who invented things that are still being used today. My father was a good man who helped everyone he could. And me? I got lucky with timing. The least I can do is pass it forward. It's more than that, Maria said. You're not just giving money. You're giving hope. You're showing these veterans that someone sees them, values them, believes they deserve better. That's rare. Stephen thought about Miranda's text message, now deleted but never forgotten. You'll die broke. She'd been wrong about the money, but she'd also been wrong about what mattered. He wasn't broke. He was rich in ways that had nothing to do with his bank account. That evening, Stephen visited his father's grave for the first time since the burial. He'd been avoiding it, unsure what to say, how to reconcile his new reality with his father's memory. He sat on the grass, tracing his finger over the simple headstone. Michael James Wright, beloved father, proud veteran. I hope I'm doing this right, Dad, Stephen said quietly. The money, the center, all of it. I keep thinking about what you would do, what you would want. I think you'd be proud. At least, I hope you would be. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees. Somewhere nearby, a bird sang. I paid off your medical bills. All of them. And I made sure the hospital knows that Michael Wright was a man who gave everything for others. They're naming a wing after you for veterans care. Is that okay? I figured you'd hate the attention but love the purpose. Stephen wiped his eyes. I miss you. I wish you were here to see what we're doing. All those guys from the VFW, they talk about you constantly. You matter, Dad. You still matter. And now I get to make sure your legacy lives on. He stood, brushing grass from his jeans, new jeans that actually fit, but still just jeans. I won't let you down. I promise. 3 years later, the Michael Wright Veterans Center had become a model for veteran services nationwide. Stephen stood in the expanded facility, watching a graduation ceremony for the job training program. 23 veterans were receiving certificates, each one representing countless hours of work, struggle, and determination. Jason Miller, the young Marine Stephen had funded through college, was now the assistant director. He'd graduated with honors and immediately returned to work at the center. These are my people, Jason had said, echoing Stephen's own words. How could I work anywhere else? The center now served over 200 veterans annually. The success rate was remarkable. 87% of residents found stable housing within 6 months. 72% found employment. More importantly, the suicide rate among program participants was 0, a statistic that made Stephen's throat tight every time he thought about it. Maria had expanded her team to include 15 counselors, job coaches, and case managers. The mobile medical clinic saw 50 veterans a week. The scholarship program had funded 63 veterans and their children through school. But Stephen's impact had spread beyond veteran services. He'd quietly funded programs for homeless families, established free clinics in underserved neighborhoods, supported food banks and job training centers. He'd discovered that real wealth wasn't about having money. It was about making it move, making it matter, making it multiply good in the world. He'd also learned to live with the complications of wealth. The people who wanted things, the family members who suddenly appeared, the friends who treated him differently. He'd developed a small circle of trusted advisors and friends who knew him before the money and still saw him as Stephen, not as a checkbook. Jerry had become his anchor, the person who kept him grounded. They still met for coffee every Sunday at Rosie's, sitting in the same booth, ordering the same breakfast. You're handling this better than most would, Jerry told him one morning. Money destroys a lot of men, but you're letting it build you up. Dad trained me well, Stephen replied. 5 years later, Stephen stood at a podium, uncomfortable in a suit that cost more than a month of his old rent, but still felt like a costume. He was receiving an award from the governor for his philanthropic work. He tried to decline it, but Maria had insisted. Let them celebrate you, Stephen. It draws attention to the cause. The cause, that's what mattered. The 15 veteran centers now operating across the state. The 2,000 veterans who'd been helped. The families reunited. The lives saved. The futures rebuilt. In his acceptance speech, Stephen talked about his father, his grandfather, the theft that had stolen one family's legacy and the justice that had restored it. He talked about the veterans who'd taught him what real strength looked like, what real sacrifice meant. This award doesn't belong to me, he concluded. It belongs to every veteran who's fighting to rebuild their life. Every person who's working to make their community better. Every individual who believes that we're stronger together than we are alone. Thank you. The applause was generous, but Stephen barely heard it. He was thinking about Frank, who now managed a community center in his neighborhood. About Carmen, who'd become a nurse and was working at a VA hospital. About Ray, who'd started a small business repairing cars and now employed 3 other veterans. After the ceremony, a young woman approached him. She was maybe 25, dressed professionally, carrying herself with quiet confidence. "Mr. Wright? I'm Sarah Chin. You won't remember me, but my father was in the Marines with your dad. When he came home with PTSD, your center helped him. He got treatment, got stable, got his life back. Because of that, I had a father growing up. Because of that, I just graduated law school. I wanted you to know your work matters. It ripples out farther than you know." Stephen's eyes burned. This was why. Not the awards or recognition, but moments like this. Lives changed. Futures possible. Hope restored. 8 years later, Stephen was 50 years old, and his life had settled into a rhythm that felt right. He lived in a comfortable house. Not a mansion, just a home, filled with books and photographs and memories. He'd never remarried, though he'd dated occasionally. Mostly, he was content with his work, his purpose, his mission. The Veterans Center network had expanded to 7 states. The scholarship program had funded over 300 students. The mobile clinics served thousands of veterans annually. And the ripple effects continued. Veterans who'd been helped were now helping others, creating a cycle of support that grew stronger each year. Jerry had passed away the previous winter, dying peacefully in his sleep at 78. At the funeral, Stephen had given the eulogy, talking about the man who'd been his father's best friend and had become his own anchor. "Jerry taught me that wealth isn't about what you have, it's about what you give." And he gave everything that mattered. On what would have been his father's 72nd birthday, Stephen returned to the grave. He did this every year now, a ritual that had become necessary. The headstone had weathered slightly, but someone had left fresh flowers, probably one of the guys from the VFW. "Hey, Dad," Stephen said, sitting on the familiar grass. "The center just opened 2 new locations. Jason's running the whole program now. You'd love him, he reminds me of you. Smart, dedicated, never gives up on anyone." A breeze rustled the trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. "I've been thinking about Grandpa lately, about the patents he invented, the money that was stolen, the justice that finally came. It's strange how tragedy and blessing can be so tangled up together. If Devereaux hadn't stolen the money, Grandpa would have lived differently, you would have lived differently, and I probably wouldn't have learned what you taught me about the things that actually matter." Stephen smiled. "I'm not saying it was worth it, the suffering, the loss, the years of struggle. But I'm saying that sometimes broken things lead to beautiful things. And you were beautiful, Dad. Your life, your values, your heart. I just wish you'd known that you didn't fail. You succeeded in every way that mattered." He stood, preparing to leave, when his phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "Antonio just got accepted to medical school. Wants to be a psychiatrist specializing in PTSD. Can we fund it?" Stephen smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. Anything he needs." As he walked back to his car, Stephen thought about Miranda's text from 8 years ago. "You'll die broke." She'd been so certain, so cruel in her certainty. But she'd been measuring the wrong things, looking at the wrong ledger. Stephen wasn't dying broke. He was living rich in purpose, in meaning, in impact. The money in his account would all be given away eventually, flowing out into the world to create more ripples, more changes, more hope. His grandfather had been a genius who invented things that lasted. His father had been a good man who touched lives. And Stephen? He was just a man trying to honor them both by making sure that what had been stolen and then restored would continue to do good long after he was gone. That night, he updated his will, ensuring that the foundation would be fully funded and independent. Everything else would go to expanding the veterans centers, establishing more scholarships, creating more opportunities for people who needed a second chance. Because in the end, the greatest wealth wasn't money. It was knowing that your life had mattered, that you'd left the world better than you found it, that the love you'd been given had been multiplied and passed on. Stephen Wright would die someday, decades from now if he was lucky. And when he did, his bank account might be empty, but his legacy would be full. He'd die broke, perhaps, in dollars and cents. But he'd die rich in every way that mattered. If this story touched your heart, subscribe now. We share real tales of struggle, redemption, and unexpected miracles that prove life can change in a single moment. Don't miss stories that remind us what truly matters. Hit subscribe, because everyone deserves to hear stories of hope and transformation.